Hello and welcome back to Swan Signal Live, everyone. This is episode 56. I'm Brady Swenson, your host, head of education at Swan. I have a fantastic episode. I'm really excited about this one. We're going to dive deep onto the ideas of sovereignism, of the state, of the way humans organize themselves throughout history, and what Bitcoin means for human organization in the future. Before we dive into this one, we are going to talk just a minute about Swan. I think the most exciting news about Swan recently that is not well known enough. So I'm going to keep pitching this until everybody knows, but we are now available globally, internationally, for individuals to sign up with Swan and fund your bank accounts, fund your Swan accounts with wire transfers from your fiat bank. You would then be able to make one-time purchases in your Swan account, and we are working on making the full suite of Swan services available to everybody internationally. So soon you'll be able to wire money into your account and set up a recurring buy schedule, which is our bread and butter. But right now you can get going and make one-time buys at our low rates, 0.99% for almost every buy if you're buying over $50 a week. So take advantage of that wherever you are in the world. Hit us up. We've been processing a lot of international accounts lately. We're also open for business with businesses, trusts, high net worth individuals, etc., through Swan Private at swanbitcoin.com/private. So if you're looking to stack over $100,000 in the next 12 months, we have a concierge service just for you. Some fantastic people on the back end to guide you on your Bitcoin journey, help you build generational wealth with this revolutionary new money that we're here to talk about today. And, I like to remind people too, there's been a lot of talk about paying yourself in Bitcoin. This hashtag going around, pay me in Bitcoin. And I love the idea. And it's been around, like it's been possible for a long time. DCA is paying yourself in Bitcoin, dollar cost averaging, buying regularly, setting up some percentage of your monthly income to be converted into Bitcoin is a way to pay yourself in Bitcoin. It's the easiest way too. So that is what we do at Swan. It is our bread and butter. Dollar cost averaging, regular recurring buys. So just set up your Swan account. You don't need to set up another bank account. You don't need to talk to your employer. You just, get that check, auto deposit into your checking account like you already have set up. And then with your Swan account, say, I'm going to put 20% of my pay every month into Bitcoin. I'm going to pay myself in Bitcoin, which is what you should be doing. It's what you deserve. Bitcoin respects your time, your hard effort, and the most scarce asset you have in this life is your time. You should reward yourself by, that hard work, for that hard work with a money that respects your time. Fiat money does not respect your time. It is under the control of a central authority, the purchasing power of that money. And as we know very well, and more and more viscerally as time goes on here, that the fiat money being debased reduces your purchasing power. And that basically means your time is less valuable as you move forward. That is not the case with Bitcoin. So pay yourself in Bitcoin. You deserve it. Do it at swanbitcoin.com. All right, so let's dive into this one today with Mr. Max Hillebrand. Hello, Max. How are you?
Oh, fantastic, Brady. Always good when I can come on a show talking with great Bitcoiners about how to earn more Bitcoin. I mean, that's fantastic.
And Robert Breedlove, welcome back to the show, man. How are you today?
I'm good, Brady. Thanks for having me. And Max, nice to meet you.
These guys have been put together here. In fact, Max requested this pairing because he's been wanting to speak with Robert, and I thought it was a fantastic idea, so I was happy to make it happen. I had many great conversations with both of these guys over the years on Citizen Bitcoin podcast. We've done a couple of great deep dives with both of them, and of course Rob's been on this show quite a few times. These guys both have a lot of overlapping knowledge and interests and passions, and their writings and works show that they're very passionate about the idea of the sovereign individual. And Rob has really started exploring that more lately in his latest series called Sovereignism. You can find that on the Swan Signal blog at swanbitcoin.com/signal, the first part of that 12-part series. And it sort of gets into the idea that, we are at this precipice of a big change for human society, not just at the individual level, but at the social level, the civilizational level. Exponential changes in technologies are moving us kind of headlong into this really unknown, uncertain future, a society that's different than anything that we've known in human history. I would love to lay the foundation for this conversation by kind of assaying the various forms of social organization that humanity has arrived at throughout history. All the way up to the advent of the modern state as we know it, maybe discuss some of their properties, similarities, differences, and maybe speculate about why those systems of organization arose at those particular points in history. And then I think we can use that sort of knowledge as a basis for talking about where we are now with Bitcoin and how it is going to be changing the modern state as we know it. Rob, I'll kick it over to you, and let's dive into talking about the various ways that humans have organized themselves in the past.
Sure. I think the easiest way to maybe start to talk about this is by focusing on the cost of information distribution. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot writing this series. And it's as if the more we decrease the cost of distributing information over time, the more we're able to reduce information asymmetries in society, in the world, and the more fair and equitable the socioeconomic structures we build become effectively. So the simple example here, and this underlies my larger thesis for the digital age. And what I point to here is the Gutenberg printing press. So Gutenberg printing press is invented in the late 15th century. Prior to its invention, there were about 10 million books produced ever. And then in the decade following its invention, there were 10 million books produced in a decade. So there was an exponential explosion in the number of books available in the world. And with this, the breakthrough here again is the decreasing the cost of information. I guess you could say creation and distribution, and that books went from being a luxury that very few people had access to being something that was much more common, that not everyone, but more and more demographics had access to. And this was a real problem for the dominant institution of the age, which was the church. The church effectively had a monopoly on knowledge through the scriptorium, which is where they had actual facilities where they produced books. So they had people handwriting books and binding them and whatnot. And the Gutenberg printing press was disruptive to that process. So not only did it decrease the cost of book production, but it also took book production out of the hands of the church and made it more widely available. And that all you needed now were, basically a blueprint for a printing press and the necessary materials, and you could go into the publishing business. So the church reacted to this adversely. At first, they didn't think it was a threat. They sort of wrote it off. And then as they started to see the outcome of this disruption to their monopoly on knowledge, which was there was a commensurate boom in the quality and variety of thinking and thinkers. We could say an amplification of critical thought, if you will, as a result of this tool that just made knowledge more accessible and more cheap. People started to question the authority and dominion of the church in the world. Many heretics emerged. This led later to things like the Inquisition and the burning of books and all these various attempts by the church to suppress and sequester the flow of information and regain their control over the flows of knowledge. But the interesting outcome of that was that the tighter they grasped, or the more they tried to suppress this information flow, the more they actually drove its proliferation, the more they highlighted the need for independent informational creation and distribution. And so I think, and we know where that led. That led ultimately to the Enlightenment, that led to the decline of the church as the dominant institution in the world, and ultimately ushered in where we are today, which I would say we're kind of post-Enlightenment going into post-industrial age. And my thesis here is that we're transitioning into a new age that's equally, if not more significant than the transition out of the feudal age. And that is, we're moving into the digital age, underpinned and upheld by the same economic principle that we've once again exponentially decreased the cost of information distribution. Now we've just the old proverbial Library of Alexandria is at our fingertips, right? In our smartphone and the internet, and et cetera, et cetera. So all the knowledge that mankind has ever accumulated throughout all of history is now more or less universally available. And, as we're proving on even this podcast here, a form of decentralized media has emerged around it. And the bandwidth costs have just collapsed. And I think you see this is reflected in the nature of the content that gets put out. When you look at something, say someone going on a nightly news network to do a certain appearance, they typically have, 5 to 7 minutes to state their piece. And that's because they have to sell advertisements to cover the cost of that distribution channel. So that has the effect of basically compressing everyone's airtime to a very small frame. So if there's a complex topic you need to get across, it's really hard to do that in 5 or 7 minutes. Well, you flip over to something like the digital age, like we're doing now, we have basically zero marginal cost of reproduction and distribution. So we can sit here and talk for hours. We can talk for 5 hours on whatever topic we want. And, similarly, this tech and solution is available to everyone else in the world. So what I think is happening is that we're going to see a similar dynamic play out from the shift from the feudal age into towards the Enlightenment, and that we're going to see this, we're already seeing this huge decline in the cost of information distribution, and we're going to see a commensurate boom in the quality and variety of thinking in the world. And this has a lot of implications for how humanity organizes himself. And this is, I'll just leave it at that. This is kind of the big backdrop I'm looking at. If you just focus on one thing, is that if we decrease the cost of information distribution, we can reduce information asymmetries in the world, which leads to more fair and equitable human self-organization, let's say. And the structures that we're operating under today, the nation state and the central bank, are critically dependent on information asymmetries. They need to operate in the veils or in the shadows, if you will. The easy target here is inflation. The fact that we have been conditioned to believe inflation is necessary for healthy economic growth is a complete lie. It's total propaganda. And that lie needed darkness to hide in, to remain, to sustain itself over time. But now, in the digital age where information moves freely and quickly, I just don't think those institutions are going to be able to uphold the necessary hiding that they need to remain salient. So I think that's where we're at. I haven't even mentioned Bitcoin yet, but I think that alone is something I've been thinking a lot about, and how digital technology is something akin to the Gutenberg printing press.
That's great. No, this was the purpose of this was to try to lay the foundation before we got into the Bitcoin conversation. Max, go ahead and fill us in with your knowledge and thoughts about the history of the way humans have organized themselves, and the ability of the individual to maintain sovereignty over themselves throughout history, and then we'll jump into where we are now and talk about Bitcoin and how that should change the way that sovereign individuals can operate in the future.
And yeah, Robert laid the groundwork quite eloquently. Let me go even one step deeper, right? And let's start with methodology and approach. Right? And as Robert would probably agree here, the individualist praxeological approach is the right point of view to look at these types of questions. Right? So we start with fundamental assumptions, with axioms, self-evident truths that we hold to be valid. And on top of that, we build via logical reasoning, deduction, and especially apothesis, right? To negate something, to say what things are not, right? And with that mindset, I think we can come to quite interesting conclusions. So when you're asking, like, how do humans actually cooperate? Well, first of all, what are humans? Right? This is for me my prime assumption, like that the human exists, the individual exists, right? And he's here right now in this very moment, and he's suffering. I have a bunch of problems basically, and you want to fix them to a greater or lesser extent. But the beautiful thing of the human creativity and ingenuity is that you can in fact envision a more prosperous reality in the future, right? That is uncertain, that is not yet here. Right, but you can think of a place that is better than your current situation is, and this again already we're talking about ideas, right? That creativity, that curiosity, that boldness to venture out into the uncertainty of the dark future, that itself spawns in the mind, right? And this is why I think it already, like, from the very existence of being human, why ideas are so important. And it goes even more than that, right? Because not just can we think of a better future, we can actually make it happen, right? We can act and specifically allocate scarce resources to those needs that we deem worthy to satisfy our ends. And so if you're hungry, you're gonna get yourself a cow and butcher a steak and then cook it, and you're gonna eat it, right? And that will have solved your problems of you being hungry. And one very important aspect here is that information are not scarce, right? Information is very much outside of that realm of scarcity, as scarce goods and services are goods that are exclusive, right? So either Alice can, eat the steak, or Bob can eat the steak, but both of them at no point in time could, simultaneously eat the steak and enjoy that benefit and solve their problems of being hungry. Right, so we have this potential conflict over who can control these scarce resources. This is then, again, how do we allocate them, right? How do we actually collaborate together so that it's not all just bloodshed and war, but that we actually have some guidance on how to live peacefully and prosperously, and not just that everyone is not killing each other, but actually that everyone is thriving, right, and getting more out of the things that he wants to achieve and solving problems more efficiently. And here is where ideas come in again, right? Because again, ideas are non-scarce, meaning they're non-exclusive, non-rivalrous. There is no conflict over who can own or use such an idea. And the words I'm speaking to you have them, but I don't give them up, right? I still retain these words that I have, these ideas, rather than them actually being diminished. I would argue that they increase with the more people I share with them, right? As I get feedback and practice in articulating these thoughts. I think this, but to bring this back, it is the sharing of information, non-scarce information, is about allocating scarce resources more efficiently. Information is nothing else than basically a technology on how to solve your problems, right? And if Rob has a brilliant idea to solve his problems more efficiently, right, sure, he can use that for himself and to advance himself directly. But the beauty is he can, without sacrificing anything, right, without sacrificing his scarce resources, he can share with me his ideas about how to allocate resources in general. And that again means that I can benefit from that additional knowledge now that I have on how to solve my problems, right? And because I'm more efficient, I'm more prosperous. And that goes not at the expense of Rob, right? Even though Rob kind of sparked that entrepreneurial, creative spark in my mind, it was not to his detriment that I was using it. Right? Again, there is not a conflict over who can have these ideas. And I think the Gutenberg Press is one of these great examples, right? As Rob laid out, that the reduction of the cost of sharing knowledge makes it more feasible for everyone to share this knowledge and to adapt it in their own resource allocation. And the more people become more smarter about how to solve problems more efficiently and where to allocate which resources to solve which problems, right? The more we do that as a grand macro economy, the more prosperous every single individual will be. And then now to honk this back all the way to the beginning of this rant, this is all it is based, and it is leading to the conclusion of the individual. Right? So we start with the individual as the logical assumption and starting point for this entire argumentation, and throughout every step, we uphold the values of individualism and the goals and the principles of it, with the ultimate goal that the individual himself lives prosperously and peacefully and to the full extent of his will.
So that's the goal. Where are we now, and how did we get here? Rob, I'll pass this over to you. Obviously, this is an aberration, historical aberration, for a lot of reasons, where we find ourselves now in the way that civilization is organized. Obviously, a lot due to the exponential accumulation of technologies and enabling a global society, etc. And I would say not in small part due to the way we manage money. So I'm going to pass it over to you to talk about how the state works and how we got here.
Yeah, I think that was laid out brilliantly by Max. I like the idea that everything starts as an idea, actually, because it's the way I've come to see the world, actually, is, and there's a term for this called universal Darwinism. And that when you boil things down all the way to their base substrate, all that's really left is information. And you could consider life itself as, we are genetic code, so we are information. And each of us has a certain strategy that we have sort of adopted intergenerationally, right? Whatever genetic capabilities we have, and then whatever we've learned in our individual life. So life itself is this set of informational strategies competing with one another to become better fit to their environment in a way. So it flips your worldview. We think kind of, even when we say individualism, right, we're thinking like human first, and it is in a sense, but it's really the ideas, the complex of ideas that represent who we are. And I think the interesting thing about ideas, and as Max said, they're non-rivalous. Only one person can eat the steak, but two people can have the idea. It's like a candle, and you can take one candle and light another or 1,000 others, and the original candle burns undiminished. That's very powerful, right? And that's actually the aim of what we're doing. That as humans, we have this gift, we have the logos, or this ability to reflect upon our own consciousness, this meta consciousness or self-consciousness, if you will, that allows us to go into undifferentiated nature, categorize it, play with it in the ideological, the epistemic plane, if you will, reconfigure it according to our ideas, experiment with these ideas, and figure out better ways of satisfying wants or solving problems. And then once someone has a breakthrough, once any one of us figures it out, again, it's just an idea at that point. It can be shared widely. And that's the kernel of economics, is that entrepreneurs are those courageous individuals that go out and confront the chaos of nature, try to figure things out, with their own skin in the game, assuming the risk themselves, whether it's their physical safety or their capital or their time, whatever it is. They're staking their own life energy, if you will, trying to figure things out for themselves, and then hoping that they can live to tell and sell the tell back into the market. And I think that's the best way to conceive of civilization. Actually, it is that that treasury of knowledge that mankind has accumulated over time, which many of us in the modern age may take this for granted, but we're just kind of born into this semi stable place with all these capital goods available to us. We can order things on Amazon and what have you. But this took a really long time to get here. There was a decision made at some point, which was really pushed by the laissez-faire economist centuries ago, that the best way to alleviate human suffering was to accumulate capital, right? Was to delay current satisfaction, current consumption, stock capital in anticipation of future events. And through that process, we'd actually free up more time, develop further innovation, and satisfy human wants in a wider and deeper way. And that's, so we've inherited this luxury, if you will, this heritage that we've been given. A lot of those ideals, I would argue, were rooted in the highest implementation of those ideals was rooted in the founding of America, right? That we are a free market capitalist society that's supposed to have minimal coercive intervention to maximize free trade and wealth creation. But of course, the institutions that have been built up around that have drifted very far since. And it all comes back to optimizing your socioeconomic systems for individual choice. And I heard this from Svetsky originally. I don't know who said it, but that choice is the sole human right, which reminds me of the Viktor Frankl final human freedom, and that we all have the capacity to choose how to respond to our circumstances, no matter what they may be. That's something that no one can take away from us. And I think that the societies that recognize this, you could call it a natural law or just a core principle of human existence, the societies that recognize and optimize for this become more wealthy, they become more attractive, they become more innovative, and they outcompete inferior structures. So the simple example there in the 20th century was just, USSR versus semi-free market capitalist United States. In the USSR, they tried to command and control the entire economy. So they essentially dispensed with the profit motive and the price signal. This mitigated their ability to accumulate capital and generate wealth relative to the United States, where we left most markets open to competition. And so the US basically outcompeted the USSR as a socioeconomic system. And then I think what I'm trying to explore in my writing is, if we look at those, again, if everything's just an idea, we could say that even communism and capitalism are just ideas in the same way that a tool is an idea, right? There's a reason the idea of Netflix outcompetes the idea of Blockbuster, right? It's just a superior distribution method. It's more efficient. It's a more efficient technology. So I think that the advent of what I've called sovereignism, which is more or less purified capitalism or I guess you could say peaceful anarchism. Anarchism's got a really bad rap, but Bitcoin has these incentives inbuilt into it that induce you to be peaceful. I think sovereignism is just the next step. It's the next socioeconomic system that is optimized for individual choice, that creates more wealth and abundance than any other system of human organization we've had before, and it will therefore outcompete all forms of statism in the long run. Because again, we've taken all those ideologies, whether it's fascism, communism, capitalism, they've all been nested under statism historically, because it's been the monopoly on violence that's decided how that implementation actually occurred. This is the first time we have a system of property rights in Bitcoin that's independent of the monopoly on violence. and it's something radically new. We can't even, it's just, and I think that's also why it's so hard to comprehend. Everyone's worldview is this, and your nationalism, your state identity, your citizenship, this is kind of the bounds of your understanding of the world. Talking to even really smart people, talk to a lot of these really smart macroeconomic guys, and they're like, the state will never allow it. What's this state going to do? What's that state going to do? And you're like, no, this thing dissolves the concept of the nation state over time. That's how big of a deal it is. So yeah, I mean, they're calling us crazy now, but I think the market's speaking to our behalf.
Seems that way, Max. I know that you have lots of thoughts. I could see the galaxy brain turning as Robert was speaking. I'll turn it right over to you.
Yeah, no, very much. I mean, Rob is so eloquent in how you articulate all these ideas, right? But as you say, like it's fundamentally all about the ideas, and even I think like individual existence in the sense of that somewhat of a fear of death, or at least that striving to become unstoppable, right? Sovereign, not dead, right? That strive to be alive and to keep that fire of life going. Even with children, like for example, children are just an information transfer, right? Your genes are literally being transferred to another individual, right? Even down to that level itself, human life and human progress is inherently tied to information itself. And we see that with memes, right? The only reason why like Rob and I are speaking up here is because we kind of want to immortalize us, right? We want to take all this wisdom that we've accumulated in our individual brains and actually manifest that in the brains of others too, right? To help both ourselves as well as others to come closer to an understanding of the truth and to live better by that truth itself. And here again, it's all about that transformation of information leading to kind of immortality. And Bitcoin is kind of like that. Like we've reached that same conclusion to an extent never heard before, right? That simply by speaking words, we can create a digital scarce asset that is actually that has a conflict over who can use that coin, right? Either Alice can spend the coin or Bob can spend the coin. Both cannot spend the coin at the same time, right? Bitcoin solves the double spending problem. That is to create scarcity out of non-scarce goods. And maybe specifically with that aim of further teleporting and transforming that information to the next level. Because all of a sudden, just with the power of speech, can we transfer our energy and our wealth and our capital to not just to ourselves across time, right? So you can hodl Bitcoin today after you bought them on Swan and stack them for another 10 years, right? 20 years, and then start spending them yourself. Right? So first of all, we transfer that information to yourself across time, but then secondly, also to other people. Right? It's not just that you yourself can keep this information, but actually you have the power to speak value to other people, and that is just utmost insane, really, that it worked. And I had this conclusion that all of a sudden we have non-simulated ownership over something. Like previously in the fiat realm, if you say, I own the house, all that basically means is that you are buddies with the monopoly of violence, right, with the government, and the government will protect you if someone tries to take the house away from you, right? But ultimately, I mean, anyone can take it away from you, right? Especially that's a trusted third party, the state itself. Now, with Bitcoin, that level of sovereign ownership is just manifested to an extent unheard of. To like that much that there has never, not once, been a single theft of Bitcoin. Did not happen ever, not once. Blanket statement, always true. Every single Bitcoin transaction in today's most proof of work blockchain has a valid signature, right? It validates the spending condition that obviously define who can spend the Bitcoin. And not once had a coin defined a certain spending condition that was not fulfilled, not satisfied, not validated with a signature script, right? And that just simply did not happen so far. So it's absolutely mind-boggling that monkeys came up with this random idea to speak words in such a way that makes theft not just difficult or not just kind of inconvenient, but fucking impossible. Like that to this day is like the real really amazing mindfuck moment that somehow we figured out how to do that. It's surreal. It really is.
I think you're on
Sorry,
mute.
there we go. It is absolutely surreal, Max. It's kind of, it's mind bending. And so here we now find ourselves with Bitcoin, sort of following from the, as you were getting to earlier, the idea of the praxeology and thinking from first principles, allowing us to fulfill from that bottom up, the base principles, the praxeology of privacy. And I know this is something that you wanted to speak about. We can get into privacy as well. But I think before we do that, let's kind of wrap this up by talking about how Bitcoin will affect the future of our civilization, of society. Now, this is what Rob's series is getting into. And I just listened to it, read by Guy Swan again this morning before we hopped on. He does a great reading of it on the Bitcoin Audible podcast. And Sovereignism Part 1 dives into how the idea that Bitcoin will kind of erode the state like an acid from within. How do you see that process playing out, Rob? And what will it be like as we experience that transition? And how will we fulfill the basic needs that the state has been providing for us, however inefficiently and ineffectively, for centuries now at this point? How will those basic needs be fulfilled in a sovereign world?
Yeah, great question. And it's, first of all, it's a complete unknown, right? We've never seen anything this colossal, I guess you could say. The implications of purely digital, absolutely scarce, theft-proof money are, we're using our imagination to think of what it looks like. There's not a historical precedent, frankly.
Yeah.
But I think to just try and paint this a bit. So these concepts are very closely related. We have sovereignty, which I would just say is the authority to act as one sees fit. There's a quote out there that says, "Sovereign is he who decides the exception." So if there are no exceptions to your chosen mode of action, then your choice is maximized, so you're maximally sovereign. This is closely related to optionality. So you could say that when you have maximized your number of options, right, no matter what circumstances or situation you may face, you have recourse to a repertoire of options that is maximally wide and varied. So no matter what comes up, you can deal with it. And that's frankly what capital offers you. Capital is optionality. No matter what risk manifests itself in your life, if you have a huge capital stock of, guns, water, food, housing, transportation, Bitcoin, on and on and on, reputation even can be capital. It can help you get through risk situations where risk is being realized. So there's sovereignty, which is, again, the ability to act. The ability to act is underpinned by the capital you hold, which is the optionality that capital affords you. And I think that the sum total of those is freedom, frankly. You're free through your own free choice. You have maximized your ability to chart yourself across space and time effectively. You get to decide when and where you go. And so these things, these concepts, sovereignty, optionality, freedom, these are the most universally demanded things in the sphere of human action. That's what everyone, every entity, every institution, that's what they want to obtain ultimately. Now, there's a number of proxies and conduits we use to get there, like profits or, cash or whatever. But that at the again, if we're looking through this lens of universal Darwinism and boiling it all the way down to its base essence, I think that's what it is. Everyone's after sovereignty, optionality, and freedom. And this is interesting because we have this proclivity as people to seek something for nothing, right? We want to obtain things with least effort. And this has kind of a bivalent quality in that, one, we could say that's what drives innovation, right? We're lazy. I don't want to dig this hole with my hands, so let me figure out a tool or an idea that I can construct something. I can invest, I can sacrifice current consumption of holes dug, save, invest, create this shovel or tool that helps me dig more holes per man hour, so I can get something for nothing effectively. I get profit from my effort. But it also, that same desire to obtain something for nothing also induces certain people to act coercively. And this is where I would say the original purpose of the nation state was to act as a protection producing enterprise around the economic surplus that capitalists create. So we're farming, we're raising cattle, we're creating tools. We need to store those somewhere, and we need to protect that from thieves, from outsiders. That's what government's original intention was, right? It's supposed to be a protection-producing monopoly. We could say too, but they go too far. And in wanting something for nothing, they tend to start abusing that power over their customers, their citizens, the ones they are protecting. They instead decide to wield violence over those to extract wealth from. Similarly, we could say central banks, they were originally established as a warehousing service for money. So gold lacked portability, which this is a very important point that I think that I try to explore in some of my writing, that a lot of the socioeconomic structures we have today are a direct result of this, the technological shortcomings of money. Gold was just the best thing we had historically. But because it lacked portability, we needed large centralized institutions to be built up around it to make it scale effectively. And so the central bank began as a warehousing service for gold. They would issue paper backed by gold, which made it more portable, made it more transactable, made it more scalable. But over time, they began abusing that trust, right? They start to take advantage of their customers, which are the depositors. So that, again, that's something for nothing. Like it starts out, maybe it can be good or it can be bad. It's bivalent, we could say. And that same principle is why gold was accumulated, right? People figured out over a long sequence of entrepreneurial experimentation, trying to store value in different objects and trade different objects, that, hey, this metal tended to be more saleable in the marketplace than anything else. And my dad and his dad, and it's just like it develops its own mimetic force as money, right? And it's all driven by this game theoretic process of people trying to get something for nothing. And so that's why gold becomes money, right? It's the best. It's not, when people call money a belief system, I think it's a really failed description. It's more like a scientific process, and that we've winnowed away all the inferior stores of value and we're left with this one thing. Mm-hmm. Max used a term earlier that I can't pronounce, apoptosis maybe, but I would say via negativa from Taleb. I know we don't like Taleb right now, but I still like his ideas, because it's not about the person, it's about the ideas. It's a via negativa process where we've winnowed away all the things that don't work and we're left with what does work. And that's how science operates as well, right? Mm-hmm. Science is not a complex of proven hypotheses. It is whatever is left over after you've disproven all other hypotheses. Whatever you cannot disprove, that is the body of knowledge, that is science. So that is why we choose gold, right? It's not a belief system that we held a committee and said, hey, we're going to believe gold is money now, guys. No, it's this long concourse of entrepreneurial experimentation that arrives at this conclusion empirically. And That same process, right? People wanting to get something for nothing is what's going to drive people into Bitcoin. What is driving people into Bitcoin? First, number go up. People want something for nothing. Hey, I can buy this thing and it just gets more valuable. I just buy this thing and I get rich. Amazing. Give me some of that. And then that process will unfold. It will kind of pull the rug out from under gold continuously. And in that process of seeking something for nothing, people are left with this kind of ultimate money that is really resistant to other people trying to get something for nothing from you, right? They can't inflate your money. They can't confiscate your money. And, without getting too deep into the Bitcoin incentive schemes, essentially everyone is bribed to see that it succeeds, right? Bitcoin just pays everyone to make it operate, which I think is really interesting. So that's the way I'm looking at it. It's everything we know, the whole current stack of human organization in the world, it's having its base layer replaced or disrupted. Gold is the base layer of the whole thing. It's being disrupted from a first principle standpoint. Where do we go from here is what I would say I explore in the writing, but the high level answer there is that the free market fulfills the functions that monopolists provide today. And they'll do it at a much lower rate, at a much more competitive rate, in a much more innovative way. We really have no idea how much human ingenuity is being restrained as a result of the monopoly on money, that I think we're just going to see this, as you always say, Brady, the Renaissance. I don't know what else to call it. So yeah.
Yeah. Max, is this going to unleash a renaissance?
Oh yeah, very much. I mean, it really makes me incredibly sad to think about the unseen cost of government over the last 100 years. Like, I mean, sure, like we see some things that were built by government. I mean, apparently we reached the moon and we got GPS technology and, all these things that the government did provide, right? But the question is, what else could we have done with these resources, right? Could we have spent these resources maybe a little bit later, right, on some technology that would have been better? Maybe it was stupid to, in 2008, invest billions of euros into solar energy, right? Maybe it would have been a bit smart to invest a little less, right, at first, see that the technology comes along, and then start investing bigly, right? So these questions of how to allocate resources, not just across space, but also across time, is just so absolutely difficult. And the hubris, the absolute craziness of some bureaucrats deeming that they have the power and the will to judge how others ought to consume and produce is just like ridiculous, flat out ridiculous. And again, the cost that it brings with itself is quite staggering, because I mean, where could we have been if all our grandparents, saved a lot and invested into deeper production stages, sound production stages where there was actually enough capital to go around to finish what we were building, right? And not running out of the resources halfway through. Like, yeah, we would very much be in a different place. So I do hope that there will be somewhat of a rebound, right, of these 100 years of fiat war into a century of prosperity with Bitcoin as that peaceful medium of exchange and store of value at its very underlying core. And as Rob said earlier, like the question of sovereignty is about setting the exception, saying no. That is the most powerful word. No. I will not do that. I will not. Right? This is what makes the individual sovereign. Not just to follow the order blindly, but to see a order that is false, is unethical, that is immoral, and to speak up to the order giver and tell him to stop. That is the most powerful thing that any individual can do. And a Bitcoin full node is a tool that does exactly this, right? A Bitcoin full node in the very first step defines the exact monetary properties, the property rights defined in a monetary asset, clearly laid out in code, right? Like that is irrefutable mathematics, right? In speech, laid out in a way that a full node can now verify if a certain transaction proposed by a other party, right, is valid or not, according to the rules of that full node itself. And if the transaction is wrong, right, if a Coinbase transaction creates 100 Bitcoin, right, my full node says, no, this is not a valid Bitcoin transaction. And with that apostasation, okay, we both mess up the words now, but with that via negativa, right, where we say, no, this is not what it is. This is false. This is wrong. And I do not accept it. Full stop, and you will not convince me otherwise. That is the power that Bitcoin provides. And now, I mean, ask yourself the question, what if like the SS under Hitler's regime all of a sudden would have said no to that bastard? I mean, the world would be a drastically different place if individual would have said no to tyranny, to theft, and to slavery. And Bitcoin, for that very first time, is like scaling the power to say no. And specifically in that monetary transaction layer that is so important, and where, well, certainly gold did solve that problem to some extent, right? But as Rob said, that centralization pressure again took the power to say no out of the hands of individuals and back into the hands of central bankers, right, and trusted third parties. That no, you're not allowed to make this transaction, right, even though it's apparently your money. All of a sudden, some other party can prescribe you how to allocate your resources. And Bitcoin, again, makes this impossible by that purest form of anarchy in money that individuals define, verify, and enforce the rules of their own property. And that just makes them the judge, jury, and executioner. And this is as much of a, well, innovation than probably anything we've seen in the theory of property rights, right? That the property rights are self-sovereign by the individual as the atomic molecular unit, right? Rather than that property rights are somehow this global state that we arrive in. No, it's individuals defining, verifying, and enforcing them for themselves. So
I think you could say the kind of the underlying value here is optionality in a self-sovereign world, right? The sovereign individual has the option to say no. That Bitcoin is a technology with an innate will to empower people with that ability to say no, with that optionality. Whereas the state, that as we know it, has a will to power over others. And so tell others no, and say you can't say no to me in return, right? And there have been various degrees of states that have said you cannot say no to us. There are certain forms of states that you can at least try to say no, or have the pretense that you can say no, right? But fundamentally, that power is there. So if we take away the power of the money and the printing press, which is a massive sort of cudgel that can be wielded by the state for all sorts of ends, not the least of which is to compel someone to say yes when they would like to say no, is that we have optionality. So in a future, a sovereign individual world, do you think that we will be a stateless society, or do you think that there will be individuals who would opt into some kind of a state as we know it today, that has a legal, infrastructure and maybe even some kind of democratic, properties to it, and then also have the option to live in a completely different way as they see fit?
I left off the last section saying that free market would fulfill these functions that the state, as the state becomes bankrupt, the entrepreneurs will rise up and satisfy whatever wants or have gone unsatisfied as a result of the decline of the state. I think in terms of what that looks like, I mean, it seems to me that government would revert back to its original form, which was just a localized protection producing enterprise. So if you want, physical security and peace in your local environment, you would contract that out to a local government, if you will, you'd pay a flat fee or a negotiated rate, and they would protect that area from violence, according to certain contract terms. I think a lot of the commercial interaction that is handled through things like the courts today, I feel like a lot of that is more likely to be facilitated by software where possible. All the dry code operations, dry code contract agreements that we enter into with one another, I think that will be satisfied by software. But then there's a great piece on this written by Parabolic Trav, and I always forget the name of his co-author, but it's called Bitcoin Contract Governance, where they make the case that we may be able to actually use multi-signature technology in the Lightning Network to have a free market contract governance mechanism. So you would not have to rely on jurisdictional courts, which I all think is really interesting. And I guess the theme here, to bring it back to ideas, is that free markets allow us to create capital formation around our best ideas. That's essentially what's happening, is that everyone's voting through buying and selling for which idea best satisfied wants across time. And the entrepreneurs that best satisfy wants become rich, right? So the people that produce and implement the best ideas are rewarded by society. They're creating more productivity or more favors or more optionality, frankly, for civilization, and they are rewarded from that civilization in money or in wealth. Contrary to this is the monopoly. The monopoly is causing capital formation around the largest military force, the wishes of the largest military force. Whereas there's just someone with a gun to your head or a threat of legal or violent coercion saying do this or else. And this is inherently uncompetitive to something like a free market. We're actually orienting it to our best ideas. But the problem historically, again, has been the confiscatability of money, the control of money, the ability to monopolize it and control it pushes us away from the free market and towards a more centrally planned coercive market. So I guess the big change here in sovereignism is that we gain this ability to orient ourselves to our best ideas, to construct our patterns of action, our institutions, everything that we do in the world now faces constant competitive pressures that keep it honest, that keep it conditioned, that keep it viable, that keep it useful. Something Saylor said jumps to mind here. He said, there's a reason animals in the wild are beautiful. And it's because they're basically the cream of the crop, right? They are whatever has survived. They are the strategies that have survived in nature. Nature being that which selects any living animal you see in the wild has made it, right? They've been conditioned against the chaos of nature, and they are really highly functional, really fit to their environment. I think the same will be true of the things we generate from the free market versus something from a monopoly. And to get there, I love the way Max put that, is that we have to scale the word no. It's a great way to look at it. No is sovereignty. So in Bitcoin, no inflation, no confiscation, no stopping it, right? There's no arbitrary justification, not even justification, no arbitrary ability to stop other people's self-sovereign expressions, which the highest self-sovereign expression you can make is your money. That's what you've sacrificed your life energy towards obtaining. And that's what you vote with. And that vote is what constitutes the structure of socioeconomic reality for us. So that, that SS guard you mentioned, like had he said no to Hitler, right, history would have taken a much different course. Well, had that SS guard not been dependent for his next paycheck from the local central bank Nazi state monopoly and had access to something like Bitcoin, he would have been more empowered with the optionality to say no. So that's the big theme here, is that we're giving, and this is something I'm getting from this show here, the ability to say no, giving people the power to say no. That's what really changes the shape of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And that the power to say no is the power of optionality. Right. It's the same thing, because if you have options, then like with any preference scale, you rank your options to the priorities of which of these options will satisfy your needs to the most fruitful extent. And then you choose only the best of them. You say no to billions of other opportunities that you could have done with your time and your capital and your Bitcoin. You say no to everything but one, right? And that in of itself, I think, makes it a free market. As long as you have that power to choose, that power to say no to everything but one, the state does no longer exist, right? Because the state, per definition, is that monopoly of violence where someone else tells you what you have to do, and you cannot say no, otherwise you die, right? So to Brady's earlier question, like what happens if we have that optionality? What happens to the state? Poof. It's gone. Magic. It was all just a trick. The emperor does not wear clothes. You can say no, and nobody can stop you to say no, right? Especially with a weapon like Bitcoin at your side.
What about the option then to say yes if you're empowered with the option to say no, right? You're also a sovereign individual, and so you can say yes to things that may hurt other people. And I know this is an ethic that is, the do no harm, do not harm others ethic is kind of an underpinning of the agorist or anarcho-capitalist sort of ethos. But people will be watching this show. They're coming into Bitcoin. We've all come from a world where we are default Keynesians economically. We're default statists that we live, and that's sort of the way things are, and they must be that way for good reason. We're taught all through school about the virtues of democracy and the hero worship of the founding fathers, and et cetera, et cetera. What the question will be, if you're self-sovereign completely and controls individuals from doing bad things, what stops them?
Yeah, I think we will each choose where to live in the world. We will choose, just like every other vendor relationship we have, right? You have a cable company, you have the internet, you have your plumber, right? You're going to have a protection producing vendor. You're going to have someone you contract with, a private security force, if you want to call it that, that will give you some assurances of security. Or you can optionally take that into your own hands to some extent. This all sounds maybe a bit anarchic and scary and crazy, and people get really worried about it. But I think it fails, I guess just stating it like that makes us consider the world we live in today. Like if there were just no government or police or military in the world today, things would seemingly be crazy. But I think it fails to account for how the incentives change human behavior. Because we are talking about something, this is not overnight, right? We're not just going to swap this out tomorrow. Something's going to happen across a number of generations, or at least a number of decades. I don't know how many generations it would take. And when there are just no incentives to violence, right? There's no economic return. Clearly, if you're going to go and break into someone's house, there's a lot of risk involved with that. You've got to plan, you've got to get your guns and mask and all the things together. There's a ton of cost to that, to go and break into someone's house. If there's not a booty on the other end of that, like some loot to be had, then there's no point in that enterprise. So if we're on a Bitcoin standard, and everyone's got their fully secured, multi-sig, globally distributed custody schema, it's like you can't steal anyone's money. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to break in and steal what? I mean, there's just nothing there. So I think it collapses the incentives to crime and violence overall. And if you couple that with the fact that Bitcoin is going to be lowering all these barriers to free trade that the state and central banks have erected, that is inversely proportionate to wealth creation. So you're pulling down the walls to free trade. We're amplifying wealth creation in the world the sovereign individual, by the way, this is another thing that we don't have a historical precedent for. So it's We don't know exactly, but there are estimates in that book that they think global GDP would increase 10x at least. So we're talking about 10x more wealth in the world, post Bitcoinization. What's there to fight about, right? You can't steal people's shit. You're richer than you've ever been. Like, what would be the point in doing? I just think it will naturally sequester criminal enterprise. I'm not saying it goes away. I'm not saying this is utopia. I'm just looking at it pragmatically and saying you can't steal the stuff and you're wealthier than ever. You're probably going to be more peaceful than ever. And it reorients us towards the dominant strategy in the sphere of human affairs being long-term peaceful cooperation. It makes us more of the laissez-faire economist original vision, which was that we would just all trade and interdepend on one another, and that would reduce the need to fight in the world. So, this is where, for me, it gets starts to touch on that religious domain a little bit, because we're talking about moving from a system that oriented people according to the scariest guy in the room, or the biggest thug, or the biggest weapon, to all of a sudden we're now going to be orienting ourselves to the best ideas. So we're moving away from need, right? Where people don't need, like, I'm trying to survive and operating out of fear. You're moving more towards want. Like, okay, I've developed some optionality. I've got some freedom. I've got my basic needs met. Now what do I want, right? What do I want to create? How do I want to spend my time? How do I want to work? And that's where we get back into that Renaissance phase, where it's like, okay, that's where people really are going to do their best work. And we're moving, again, this is the digital age. So like, we're moving from the physical domain being our primary existence, largely to this metaphysical domain, this digital domain, where we're keeping our capital, we're trading our ideas, we're governing our lives more close to the logos, right? We've increased individual choice and individual expression, I guess you could say. And that, a lot of things in the Bible, I get this from Jordan Peterson, where if we look at like sin is these selfish pursuits: gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, lust, envy, pride, whatever the 7 are. They're selfish pursuits that improve your present biological situation at the expense of others and the expense of long-term considerations. Whereas the flip side of that would be virtue, right? You're like your cooperation, compassion, peace, harmony, understanding, all these things. They often are sacrificing your present enjoyment in the interest of longer term gratification. And so I think, and the other thing is, so oftentimes hell is portrayed as the intellectual or the spatio-temporal domain, whereas heaven is more like the metaphysical, the epistemic, the knowledge, domain of knowledge. And there's a quote in, I think it was the book of Timothy. It says the kingdom of heaven is spread about the earth, but men do not see it. And I think this points to just the knowledge structures that exist in the world. We think we're creating knowledge, which I guess we are creating it in our own mind, but we're really just revealing it in nature. We're just like, oh, this is how you fly. You need to move the wind faster over the top of the wing than you do the bottom of the wing, and it will create lift, and we can fly around the world. So we're revealing the laws of nature, the hidden, the unseen laws of nature through this process. And I think that maybe that's where, again, it gets into that domain where it's transcendent, right? This is something that's taking us from a form of reality that we think is very physical, very materialist, to something more ideal, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And as you laid out, there are less incentives to steal for people, right? But on the other hand, you can still steal, even in a Bitcoin world, right? There is a lot of harm that you can do. And that is the other side of the coin of being sovereign. You are sovereign to slap your neighbor into the face, right? And nobody can stop you from doing that. You can manifest your will if you so choose in such an aggressive way. Free to choose, right? But not free to ignore the consequences. And the consequences will come to haunt you. Same as Rob just said, we can discover laws of gravity, for example, right? That if you jump off a cliff, well, you're free to jump off the cliff, but you're not free to fly away and to not land on the ground into a big splash, right? You are free to slap your neighbor into the face, right? But you're not free to not live with the consequences of him coming after you and slapping you back, right? So and this kind of ties nicely into the incentives, right? Because not just is everyone's wealth better protected, and therefore it is more difficult to steal it, but also if you would steal it because everyone else is better protected wealth, they will again come after you, right? And here, this is again where I think, even a sovereign individual per se might not even be kind of that highest ideal to strive for. Again, it's like nation state is sovereign and it kills billions of people, right? So this just being sovereign is not good enough. With great power comes great responsibility. What do you do with all that optionality? Yeah, you can choose out of everything, but what do you actually choose, right? And what are your guiding fundamentally moral principles that help you make that choice of where to allocate your resources, right? What to spend your time on, and how to act, which problems to solve. And this is again something that is fundamentally individual, right? Only you yourself know actually what your problems are, and only you yourself can come up with these genius ways of trying to solve them. So yeah, again, like I'm not sure if the sovereignty per se, like a weak man who has sovereign power is going to make many big mistakes. The beautiful thing is that once he makes those mistakes, he will have to live with the consequences, right? If you made the naive mistake of spending your Bitcoin on, I don't know, Dogecoin or some other shit, right? Sure, you were free to do that. Bitcoin gives you that sovereign power to spend your money wherever you choose, right? But you are now the fool because you have no Bitcoin, while you could have had billions of sats in your pockets, right? So again, the power of choice has to come with the power of responsibility. And the courageous individuals of this new era of cyberspace need to live up to that responsibility, and not just to shoulder it and to carry that burden, but to thrive despite, or maybe because, such a great burden is put on top of you, that it's your turn to choose. And if you choose wrongly, you will live with the consequences. And this again feeds back beautifully in this incentive loop to no longer steal from each other, right? Because stealing from others is very risky if you have to carry the consequences of that.
I agree with that a lot. I like the free to choose your course of action, but not the consequences necessarily, because it's the same with the money, right? We're free to choose Dogecoin or fiat or whatever you want, but you cannot avoid the consequences of not choosing Bitcoin effectively.
Yeah.
And it's a great point too, that, despite the power that science has given us, it cannot tell us what we should do, right? Again, through science, we've created this material abundance. We've created Bitcoin, frankly, and it's allowed us to create a lot of material wealth, but it can never tell you what to do. Science can never be prescriptive about how you should spend your day now that you don't need to work and all your material needs and wishes are met. I think I've heard it put, you cannot derive an ought from an is, right? So there's this fundamental difference between the objective domain and the subjective domain of morality and frankly, value expression, right? Where with every action that we take, we are expressing what is highest in our own personal hierarchy of values. So we have arranged, and this is for anything, to walk across a room. I value the other side of the room more than where I am currently sitting. When I walk to the other side of the room, that is me expressing that value. And the action that I take after that is next in the hierarchy of my own personal values. That I agree that when we remove the constraints of material reality to a large extent, which is what wealth creation is, right? Capital accumulation. We're just removing constraints or increasing optionality, that it puts increased emphasis, as human beings have all of this newfound time to sort of decide what they should do. It puts a newfound, or maybe a rediscovered emphasis on morality, on moral codes, on religion, on, how do you orchestrate yourself? How do you teach your kids? What are the rituals that bind you together? All of these become very important questions after hyper Bitcoinization. And I don't know the answers. I don't know the answers at all. I think it's very interesting. I myself, again, have fallen down the Jordan Peterson rabbit hole, and he explains the psychological significance of the Bible in a lot of different ways, but not just the Bible. He covers Taoism and a number of other wisdom traditions. And I think there's just a lot of value there. So I talked about this with you, Brady, a long time ago, that my intuition was that the digital age was reawakening us to ancient wisdom.
Yep.
And I just see that. I see that everywhere. I mean, I can't unsee it lately.
Ever since we had that conversation, yeah, I'm seeing it everywhere as well, and it makes sense. It's we're in such an era of uncertainty in terms of where things are headed. I mean, not just Bitcoin and the changing of the money, but exponential technology is a scary thing to contemplate, because things are happening so quickly, right? The telescoping nature of evolution of human technologies, and we're living now where we're seeing massive like step changes in the power of technology happening in a lifetime, a generation, down to 10 years, 5 years, 1 year, and that's just going to continue to mount and accelerate. And so with all of this change that we're facing, it makes sense that we will look back to the ancient wisdom, the tried and true ways of how to find human fulfillment at a time like this, because there's existential angst on a global level happening right now.
Yeah, very much. One thing that I would somewhat like to push back on, or kind of elaborate on what Rob said, is that after hyper Bitcoinization, we will have to solve these very challenging ethical problems. And I would say that we will never reach a state of hyper Bitcoinization if we do not find the answers to these ethical questions now. Right there, this is a law of cause and effect, and it is as solid as gravity is, or the speed of light is, right, or the density of matter. As morality increases, freedom increases. As morality declines, freedom declines. Always, every time, without a single fault. The universe is perfect like that. Right? So we cannot reach this bliss, this utopia of hyper Bitcoinization, if we do not come up with the answers of what must we not do. What am I, the sovereign individual, not doing? What is that one thing that I will actually not do? And on what instead will I focus my time on? Yeah. These are the questions. And by the way, I think so many Bitcoiners have found meaningful answers to this question already now. And I think this is what we see with that incredible motivation and strive and fire in the heart of so many Bitcoiners, because they have glimpsed just a small part of the answer to that question. And this is what is so powerful already. And we see this after 10, 12 years of Bitcoin, right? Just think about the conclusions that we might be able to reach in a bit more time, right? Once we have more brain power thinking about these difficult questions and trying to solve these problems, again, where we could be without government intervention, without that aggressive tyranny, it's absolutely speechless. It would be heaven on earth.
Yeah, we can't even contemplate it because of the shadows of the way we've been living, and you're right, slowly starting to open our eyes and see the possibilities. And that is not just outward looking, it's also inward, and we feel it fundamentally. And we talk about this all the time as Bitcoiners, that there seems to be this emergent ethic within the nature of Bitcoin, whatever it is, that incentivizes us to do better, to be better, to make better choices. And it starts with something small, maybe a small little economic incentive to think longer term. And then that snowballs into the rest of your life. And all of a sudden you're making better decisions ethically and morally. And, you roll that up and accumulate that over, an entire society and civilization. I think beautiful.
I agree. Beautifully said. And I often think about this actually, that there's reflexivity between creator and created, right? Between man and tool. What did Churchill, the things we create in turn create us, kind of thing. So there's this, and another author said that there is the monetary standard and the moral standard are inexorably linked, right? So like hard money basically means we're on a free moral standard. So is there any, like, question to Max, like moral code historically? Because it seems like we should focus on what we should not do, right? We're increasing our optionality and our power, which gives us this, nearly virtually infinite range of options, but we need to establish morally what lines we don't cross. Is there any moral code? Like the one that comes to mind is the 10 Commandments kind of thing. Like, are there moral codes that you've studied or seen that you think are applicable to this emergent ethic?
Yeah, that's such an important question, right? And I think, again, most schools of thought tackle the answer in the very wrong way. Like they ask, what is the right that you have to do, right? You have a right to healthcare. You have a right to a decent wage, right? You have a right to a golden helicopter. Everyone has all these rights all of a sudden, right? How? I don't get it. But so rather, like, I like that approach of do what thou wilt, right? But do these things not. And yeah, the 10 Commandments are a very interesting approach in that. But I think it can even be, further condensed down to one single rule, and that is do not steal. That's it. Do not break individual private property. That's it. And that excludes murder, assault, theft, rape, trespassing, lying in contracts. What am I missing? I think one more. But I mean, I think like all of the wrongdoings that I intuitively have a feeling that they are simply wrong, not true, not accurate, the wrong thing to do, right, can be condensed down to do not steal private property rights. And this is what gets me so bullish on Bitcoin, right?
Because your body is your property, right?
Your body is your property, exactly. Yeah. It's a scarce resource where there's a conflict of ownership, right? Like either you move your body to A or you move your body to B, right? But you cannot split it apart. So where are you going to move your body to, right? And this means that we have to allocate those resources of who can control this body. I think the way to figure it out is the homesteading principle. I, the individual, magically woke up into this body a couple of years back, right? And ever since then, I was using it and I homesteaded it. It's mine and it's not yours. And I decide what to do with it and you do not.
Beautiful. So the one commandment of Bitcoin, thou shalt not steal.
And yeah, if you realize that the one ethical rule is do not steal, to then have a monetary network that makes it impossible to steal, like it's incredible. Yeah. Like I'm speechless.
I mean, yeah, it's nearly impossible to steal. And what the most important front that it's impossible to steal on is with inflation, and that's that theft. You can't steal through inflation, which is obviously done the most harm. This has been a fantastic conversation, gents. I do have this one little video I stumbled across on Twitter, and you guys probably saw this the last couple of days. It's a Buckminster Fuller video. Did you guys see this on Twitter? Okay. Cool. So you'll see it for the first time, but I thought of both of you. And so I uploaded it to be able to play. And I just thought it would be fun to get some reaction from you on this. Of course, Buckminster Fuller is a famous architect, born in the late 18th century, I think like 1895, and lived all the way through the 80s. Architect, author, designer, futurist, just a great thinker in general. So I will play this, and I think it's just fascinating on the level of that Hayek quote, Hayek video from the 80s, where he said, we'll never have control of the money again until we take the thing out of the hands of government. This is similarly prescient. So here we go.
Because now I'll have to talk about something which will be one of the very big new realizations by 2000 AD, which will be a realistic scientific accounting system of what is wealth. We now know that wealth isn't the goal that the old pirates used to have. Wealth is energy, and we have an Einsteinian world in which the scientists found that when energy left any local system, engine, it only did so by joining another system. It did not go out of the universe. But experiment after experiment, they found the energy never got lost. So they had to write an entirely new law of energy called the law of conservation of energy, which said energy can neither be created nor lost. So this suddenly we got a new clue to wealth. Wealth is not something that's going to deteriorate and get lost, which was a great way of thinking and all the economics. Next thing I discovered that wealth consists of something more than energy. It consists. So I find that now that every time we use it, we say, I make an experiment. Now, every time you make an experiment, you always learn more. You can't learn less. You may learn that what you thought was happening isn't happening. That saves you a lot of your time, because we want to then increase the effectiveness of our time. So I then say that the intellectual factor in wealth is one which every time we use it always improves. We always learn more. I've discovered that the energy part can't run down, and the intellectual factor, every time we use it, improves. Therefore, wealth, I discover, is something that always increases. So that I would then point out to you that we are going to be able to afford to make everybody customers, and we're going to be able to afford then to bring in your Africa. And this is the answer to your question. We talk all world, we're going to have to make all of humanity successful.
Wow, right?
That's interesting. I mean, I think I get the general tendency, but one thing where I'm not so sure about is that as time progresses, humans get more smarter every time. I think that's somewhat of a fallacious thought, because if that were to be true, we only have to read, for example, the most recent books. Like the book that was published today entails all of the knowledge from the past, right? And nothing that was in a book of the past could not be in a book of the future, right? So, and I think that type of mindset, I mean, actually, I think it might be accurate if we're talking about the purely scientific realm. Like if we're talking about physics and mathematics, then probably yes. But in the realm of human action, where value is subjective, I think we cannot make such a blanket statement like this. And by the way, I'm drawing here from a great book that I just recently reread, Murray Rothbard's Economic Controversies, which on a reread actually turned into one of my most favorite books by Murray. But I'm very curious what Rob has to say about that quote.
I agree with Mr. Fuller that knowledge is wealth, right? That's how we started off this conversation, is that ideas are fundamental. So the more, if we define knowledge as the ideas to which we have access, effectively, I guess the useful ideas to which we have access, the more knowledge we have, the wealthier we become. So I guess also assuming it's implemented. It's like you can't just know it. It has to also be implemented into the world. But we can, I agree with Max, it's not a definite progression. We can also regress. I mean, that's what the Dark Ages were, right? We achieved a certain level of civilization, and then we had a collapse, and we lost 1,000 years of progression. So yeah, I guess it comes back to choice. It's like if we choose to operate within moral bounds, then if those moral bounds were immutable, then I guess in theory we could be in constant progression. There's no known natural limit to the amount of knowledge we can obtain, or the commensurate sophistication of civilization. So, but I do agree that it's not a given. All right, we have to, which it interestingly does point back to the moral situation. We need to operate within these sound moral boundaries to, I guess, optimize our chances for progression.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Though the one of the
ahead.
thing is right that, as you said, you cannot create or destroy energy. You can only reallocate it, and I think that is fundamentally true. There also in the realm of knowledge, there is no new knowledge under the sun. Right,
That's
everything you can rediscover, right, in a new point of view, but it has always been there. The truth is ever eternal. So, but nevertheless, I do believe that, or this is not a hindrance of ever expanding human flourishing, because the universe grows as we observe it, right? And the more humans observe outwardly, the more energy is at that disposal to be reallocated, right? So like narratives like, oh, we're going to run out of land or food or oil or something in the planet if we continue our consumption, most certainly is fallacious, and we've seen it just by the Club of Rome being wrong on every 20-year prediction that they make, right? Because humans are a expansive creature that observes new reality and then transforms that energy that was discovered in this reality into some other production stage that is valuable for the individual. So that is a very hopeful like part of the quote.
I think this points to one last maybe nugget to chew on. Is we've been focused a lot recently, or at least I have, on things like Sphinx Chat and these other higher layer protocols that enable unstoppable free speech effectively built on top of Bitcoin, which revivifies a lot of the great promise of the internet as this democratizing tool. But what if it's also, so if that's the case, but it could also almost make history immutable in a lot of ways. So if we're actually storing all of our knowledge here in these higher layer protocols or media technologies, in theory, they'd be as immutable as the Bitcoin blockchain across history. So this, by making history immutable, we may have access to a richer repository of knowledge that supports civilizational advance and prevents or inhibits regression to the best of our ability.
Interesting.
Well, I would agree with you that if we would put all of these messages on the blockchain itself, because the blockchain is that global consensus layer where every full node has a copy, reads the copy, verifies the copy, right? Then yes, we kind of do have a provable record of time, right? Even with proof of work to make it difficult to rewrite the history. Or, well, not impossible, right? Just difficult. With Lightning Network, or maybe more generally speaking, client-side validated state, right? Where we have the most recent state update no longer being gossiped to the entire network on a global consensus layer, which does not scale, right? We keep some of that state, some of that information on the client side, not being shared with the more larger ecosystem. So Lightning Network is probably one of the early implementations of such a client-side validated state infrastructure. RGB, for example, something a bit more elaborate. Proof Marshal, even more so. But I think with these types of systems, again, because the individual node chooses to not reveal everything to the other full nodes, but to keep most of the information actually hidden, client-side, private, right? That does change something. But where RGB is very interesting here, where then if you want to make an update to the state transfer, like if I want to send Rob an RGB token, for example, I actually have to prove the entire history of that state update mechanism, right? So in fact, even with these things like Sphinx or RGB, where we do rely on these client-side validated states, if you want to verify it, and if you want to actually come to the truth of what is being said in that client-side validated state, then in fact you do again need to have all of the history, right? And so in that sense, you are back on track. But the beauty of the Bitcoin blockchain is that it's like that sharing of the information is by default for everyone, and everyone is in consensus. Well, with client-side validated state like Lightning Network, we somewhat keep most of these state updates for ourselves locally, and only when the time comes where we actually need to prove it, do we go back into the global consensus layer, into that unbreakable, provable track of history.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I found it. post that video to Twitter, or I'll send it to both of you, but I'd give it another listen or two because there's a lot there. But the prediction just on the idea that we need an accounting system of wealth that's based on energy, the laws of energy and thermodynamics, so that wealth cannot be created nor destroyed. It's there, and it can be reallocated based on work and value, right? But the ability to add value to the system by printing more tokens is a corruption of the system, and that the only way to remove that corruption is to rely on the laws of physics. So I thought that was fascinating. He's talking about, the necessity of proof of work way back then. So fascinating stuff.
Thermodynamically sound money.
Exactly. Proof of stake won't work. Buckminster Fuller knew that. So I'm gonna have to wrap it up there, gents. We could go on forever. I have something else to get to, unfortunately. Thank you guys so much for joining. I think this was a wonderful conversation. I knew it would be. Max, Rob, will invite you guys to just tell us where viewers can find you and whatever you're up to that you'd like to share. Max, why don't you go first?
Yeah, sure. So I do a lot of contributions in the Bitcoin free software space in general, even though I'm much more of a philosopher than a coder. So you can probably catch a lot of my recent activity on GitHub, specifically for Wasabi Wallet, which is one of those privacy projects that I just love. Again, privacy being the aspect to selectively reveal yourself to the world, to choose how to act in front of others. Right? It ties into exactly what we talked about here for all that time. And my personal site is towardsliberty.com, where I also offer Socratic seminars that talk about exactly what we're talking here, about Bitcoin, economics, praxeology, liberation strategies, operational security. So if the audience would like to actually be part of such conversations as we're having them here, towardsliberty.com is the place to be.
Excellent. Rob, what are you up to?
I am working on the What is Money show. We're about to release the Booth series. We've had a little bit of delay. It's hard to run a podcast, as I'm learning quickly. You make it look easy, Brady. You can find me on Twitter, which my Twitter handle is my last name at Breedlove22, BREEDLOVE22. There's links to all my work there. My writings on Medium. And links to the YouTube and the podcast website are there as well.
Excellent. And there's a book in progress, right?
There's a book in progress. It is a really rough notes and a table of contents that I'm trying to synthesize together. So it's I would like to say I'm going to get it out by the end of the year, but knowing myself historically, I tend to run long on things. So
hey man, writing a book is much harder than a podcast. That's for sure. So
low time preference book writing, absolutely.
But I know
the writing I know how to do at least. The podcast is all these things I just haven't figured out yet, like the mic and the camera and this and that. So
you're looking good. And you're sounding good, man. You're making progress.
Thanks, man.
And the worst things from podcasts is the post-production. Like if you want to do that, like editing, sound quality, all of this. I mean, your Swan Signal does a lot of these things live, which I think is still tricky, but probably a lot easier. But yeah, for most of my podcast, I was a lazy bum and did not do any editing. Like the raw thing goes up because, well, good enough. But yeah, actually putting in the work for some nice production quality is definitely worth it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I've got a guy lucky for me because I don't know how to do any of that.
Well, What is Money show? Check it out. It's on YouTube. Whatismoneypodcast.com and towardsliberty.com for Max's work. Of course, both of them are on Twitter at Hillebrand Max and at Breedlove22. All right, we'll leave it there for this episode, guys. Thanks so much. Appreciate your time, and we will see you next time that we have the chance to get together. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us here today for episode 56 of Swan Signal Live. You can find the podcast, the audio archive at swansignalpodcast.com. We do this every other Wednesday. And in between weeks, you'll be able to find me on my other podcast, Citizen Bitcoin, at citizenbitcoin.world. So I do one podcast every week in these two different formats. Citizen Bitcoin is more of just it's a one-on-one, more of a conversational show, as opposed to this one where we have a couple of guests and I'm kind of guiding the conversation. So check out Citizen Bitcoin as well. Go to swanbitcoin.com and get set up if you are not already. And if you are, you need to get your friends and family on board. All right, you're still early here at the dawn of this Bitcoin renaissance. We're at the beginning of the monetization process of this revolutionary new money. So, getting a stake on the Bitcoin blockchain will still pay off in terms of purchasing power and just value to you and your life and the life of your loved ones in droves. Getting started now. We do that at Swan. We focus on Bitcoin only, the only crypto asset, the only cryptocurrency that matters, the only one that is a real player on the global monetary stage, the one that has been adopted as a protocol on the internet for the transfer of value and wealth. And as we know, and as I talk about a lot, protocols on the internet tend toward one because of network effects, because of efficiency. We have TCP/IP that is the basis of the internet and has been for decades. And despite the fact that we might be able to put together some vastly better version of TCP/IP with all that we have learned about networking protocols over the past 40 years, we do not implement them because we cannot, because we have so much value built on top of it already. The same thing is happening right now with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the protocol for the transfer of value over the internet. And this is why we call ourselves Bitcoin maximalists, or at least one of the reasons why. The same thing applies to money. All right, we converge on a money for efficiency, a single money. We have a global economy now. The internet connects all of us. So we believe that we will converge on one money. And those are the two pillars of Bitcoin maximalism, the technological pillar, the monetary pillar. That's why we're here. And that's why Swan only works with Bitcoin, so that we can keep our fees low and that we do not entice you into any other altcoins or ideas out there that may be distracting so that you could make a quick buck. We are long-term focused and here to help you learn, and with shows like this, about what's going on here. So that's what we do. We turn your fiat into Bitcoin at the best possible rate that we can. We're 80% lower than Coinbase, or up to 80% lower than Coinbase, about 50% lower than Cash App on fees. And we're here to educate you. So please do get on the bandwagon, join the Swan Squad. If you're already on it, you can go to swanbitcoin.com/enlist, ENLIST, and join the Swan Force. You'll earn 25% of Swan's fees on every purchase your referrals make for 3 years. That can turn into some meaningful sats. We have Swan Force members stacking some real money right now. So check that out, and we will help you recruit as much as possible, give you educational resources, and we do webinars to help explain some ways and tactics and ideas on how to approach friends and family and get them to understand what's going on here. The more you understand about Bitcoin, the more you're willing to buy. So get out there and educate your friends and family, get them on board. That's what we're doing here at Swan to help you out, swanbitcoin.com. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you in 2 weeks.